Welcome, Bulldog fans, to Game Week. Yes, Steve, we had a little problem with our video yesterday. The video was great. I mean, we were awesome. I mean, maybe one of our best videos ever. The audio was missing. So today we're kind of doing a day after what we learned from Joe Moorhead yesterday, what we expect to learn from the offensive players we speak to tonight. Let's talk a little about Southern Mississippi. Now that we had a chance to look a little bit at the Golden Eagles coming off a big win over Alcorn State. I know they struggled early on. They had a big kickoff return. In fact, had 2 returns for touchdowns. And given the way State special teams played last week, that's certainly something that's going to catch Joe Moorhead's interest. But the Eagles are an interesting matchup coming in. A lot of confidence. I'm sure they've had all summer to prepare for this game, where Mississippi State has to focus on quite a few games in the September part of the schedule.
Yeah, it's true. And David, back to yesterday's video, I regret to inform our viewers that there were several things that we said yesterday that the athletic department have locked down today, so we won't be able to share those. So
actually, the truth is, Gene gave us both a big raise, but now we can't prove it. It's gone forever.
Right. But back to Southern Miss, Jalen Adams was the Conference USA Special Teams Player of the Week, a punt return and a kick return. It really blew that game open. It was a pretty tightly contested game for a while against Alcorn State, and that may have been a bit of a surprise for people. But the Golden Eagles, pretty vanilla there. They win the ball game. Could be without the services of one of their top running backs this week, though, which is something important, especially when you consider Mississippi State's run defense is a little bit shaky right now. So that'll be interesting. You won't have quite as mobile a quarterback with Jack Abraham back there, but he is a guy that the Mississippi recruiting fans should be very familiar with out of Oxford High School. Prolific career there at OHS, really threw the ball around. Probably similar to what Nick Mullins was, and some Bulldog fans will remember him.
Mm-hmm. Mississippi State, of course, has not played Southern Miss since 2015. This renews a 2-year home. I think the second game, 22-23, coming up a couple of years now, a double home and away series set. It's a good rivalry in a lot of ways. I know back in the 80s and 70s it wouldn't have said so, but in fact today for this week's edition of our flashback, I wrote about the 1989 game, which still is a very fond moment in my memory. The football world has changed a whole lot in 30 years. Southern Miss, they should be ruling Coosa. I know they had some struggles lately, but now Jay Hobson seems to have it back in order, and I think they have a chance to win that conference this year if they play up to their capabilities. The Bulldogs at this point. Mississippi State actually has more Mississippians on the roster than Southern Miss does, but how seriously, since you deal with these kids in recruiting on both sides, do they even take this as a rivalry anymore?
No, they really don't, and I mean this with as much respect as possible because I've got a lot of family members that graduated from Southern Miss. My wife graduated, my mom, all Golden Eagle alums. But it's just a different day and time. Back in the 80s, as you mentioned, there was the, quote, Big Three in Mississippi, Southern Ole Miss and Mississippi State. But when State and Ole Miss stopped playing them, we went to the 8 conference games, it kind of, I guess you could say, pushed Southern Miss out. And so as a result, the recruiting wars changed. The recruiting aspect of things changed. And there are a lot of kids at Southern Miss that would have loved to have had the opportunity to play in the Southeastern Conference. It's very rare that you see Southern Miss win one of those recruiting battles. I guess DeAndre Brown out of Ocean Springs several years ago, one of the top 3 receivers in the country that year. And for those of you that have forgotten that recruiting year, that's the A.J. Green, Julio Jones, DeAndre Brown. DeAndre Brown finished third in the country to those 2 guys who have been prolific NFL players, had that debilitating injury in the ball game. But it's a different day and time. And, David, people forget, and you're old enough to remember this as I am as well.
Thanks for reminding me.
Absolutely. Southern Miss had a 9-game winning streak in this series, 9 games. And the series now is tied 14-14-1. So the winner this weekend will take the lead in the all-time series lead. And it's been a long time since Mississippi State has held that advantage.
Correct in that, because I had to suffer through a lot of those games in the 70s and 80s myself, but it is a different world now, and certainly we'll talk more about Southern Mississippi when we shoot our Friday video out at the stadium. Let's talk about what we learned from Joe Moorhead yesterday. We had a day to think about it, to kind of get some follow-up from staff about certain things. First off, talk about the health situation. Do we think Darrell Williams and Deron Parker and Marquise Spencer as well will be able to play this week?
I think it's still too early to tell in the week, and that was one of the things that Joe said on Monday is that Tuesday's practice would go a long way in kind of determining their availability. I don't expect them to do much this week. I think you hold them out and then you make it a game-time decision. And I was told yesterday a couple of those guys for sure will probably boil down to how they feel in pregame warm-ups. Now, one guy we don't have to worry about is running back Kylan Hill. He did practice on Sunday, of course, had a day off. Right back at practice again today, and so we expect him to be good to go. The SEC leading rusher, Kylan Hill, at 197 yards, third nationally at this point. And David, he has really kind of positioned himself to be the bell cow of this offense. A lot of discussion about Tommy Stevens, but really the guy that benefits the most from Tommy Stevens being able to complete some passes down the field is Colin Hill, because it backs those two safeties out. And one of the things I want to talk about that too, David, a football comment. I had a guy tell me earlier today, a good friend of mine, said, I don't know why Colin couldn't rip off some of those big runs. Well, let me tell you a couple things. Last year, Mississippi State faced a lot of 8- and 9-man boxes where the safeties walked down. When they're playing two high safeties, it's a little more difficult to rip off those 70- and 80-yard runs. You're going to see a lot more of these 20- and 30-yard runs, but you may not see these 75-, 80-yard runs where as soon as you break containment, it goes to the house. So be patient, but anytime somebody gets almost 200 yards in rushing, they've had a good day.
And that said, Nick Gibson, I expect he got 2 carries last week, did the most with him, 27 yards and 2 carries. As Coach Moore had said, you ride the hot hand, and Hill certainly was hot. But you think Nick Gibson certainly has a chance. Do you expect Lee Witherspoon to play this year, or do you see him kind of on that redshirt track of pick and choose the 4 games he's in?
I think that's still like a wait-and-see thing. They've mentioned he is a third-team running back, but that they showed no issue last week of playing a third-team running back. You mentioned Nick got in the game a lot, only had the 2 totes, but 13.5 yards a carry and a touchdown. Both were explosive plays, a first down and a touchdown, and that's kind of who Nick is. And one of the things I'd like to go back maybe in the twilight of his college career is maybe get Dan Mullen or Greg Knox on the phone and say, guys, can you explain to me why he didn't get more carries in his 4 years here? I'm sure he'd be interested to know that as well. But the bottom line is State has 2 capable backs. They can kind of afford to take their time. As long as everybody stays healthy, I think you're real patient with Lee Witherspoon and maybe use him sparingly. And,
of course, the status of Kareem Walker could factor into that. Should he be cleared and be able to join the team and contribute the second half of the season, then you have a little more flexibility to what you do with Witherspoon. Briefly getting back to injuries, I requested Evans Wilkerson, who stepped in and played a good job at center today. I've been told I cannot interview him tonight because he's still on a day-to-day injury basis, and policy is we don't talk to players who are questionable for injury. What does State do if neither Darrell Williams or Evans Wilkerson can go at center this week?
Well, and you got Darian Parker in there. Darian's actually officially your second-team center, but he was also banged up. LaQuinston Sharp stepped in. I don't know if I've ever seen a ball game where you had to play your third and fourth-team center. And so LaQuinston Sharp, I understand, is going to get more reps this week, just kind of in anticipation as an emergency-type situation. Did a really good job. As a matter of fact, Cole Kublik had a video out today of he and Greg Allen just kind of mowing through some of the Louisiana defense there. But that's what you do. And LaQuinston Sharp is one of those guys, too, that's kind of being groomed for the future. Darian Parker took more snaps, according to Marcus Johnson, as center this fall than he did at guard. And so you're not completely empty cupboard-wise looking forward, but this weekend could be awfully dicey.
Also, Mississippi State will be keeping an eye on a couple of situations. Alan Love is still appealed for his waiver and need that depth. And now, as long as Lee Autry is presumably sidelined for 8 games this season, defensive tackle, again, becomes an issue. But Coach Moorhead had something interesting to say yesterday, that they don't really want to have a true rotation per se as we think of it, certainly as they were able to the last couple of years. But they want to have package-type rotations in there. They want to be able to – they certainly don't want to do what they did last week and have to give the first 2 defensive tackles, both redshirt freshmen or sophomores, too many snaps, but they want to get some kind of rotation going without actually calling a rotation. Can you interpret that for us?
Well, basically, is they don't want to alternate series, but there will be some packages, some base defensive type stuff that probably will involve Fabian Lovett and Jaden Crumedy staying in there. And I think you're going to see Nathan Pickering get more reps this weekend. He didn't play last weekend, and ideally you'd like to redshirt him, but the bottom line is necessity kind of dictates that he be a part of this thing now. And so they'll figure those things out. But the bottom line is, Bob Shoop is one of the best defensive coordinators in the country, bar none. He's one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. As he gets a handle for his personnel, he will scheme around that. This defense will get better as the year goes along. And David, we mentioned the suspensions. And the bottom line is this is something that is going to be an issue until it is behind us. And you got one game down, and those players all sat out the ball game, and then we'll kind of see how things go. And if the Bulldogs can stay healthy, you can get this behind you quicker rather than later. Of course, Jace Crispin, the place kicker, is supposed to be back. Do we expect Michael Story back this week, or is his suspension going to be another week? That remains to be seen. And nobody wants to talk about that, and rightfully so. There's some things that they want to hang on to, but he did mention Jace Crispin is back. Jordan Lawless, 1 for 2 last week, made all 4 of his extra points. Jace Crispin, a lot more experience there. You'd like to have him back. And honestly, I think this is probably something they foresaw coming, because Joey Jones stood at this podium next to us and said, well, competition is still really close. I think Jace is your guy. Jordan is proven to be a serviceable backup, but Jace being back, I think gives everybody a little more confidence.
Of course, the hot topic on the boards has been the tackling or lack thereof in the first game, and there were a lot of reasons for it. Lafayette, very physical running team. What was concerned me more was the yards after the first contact they got, but give them credit for running hard. Their quarterback, very escapable. This is a different type of offense they're fixed to face this week, and as you mentioned, Abraham, a good, more traditional type passer, whereas if they don't have their lead running back, though, it kind of simplifies State's defensive challenges. Steve, Coach Moorhead is like every other coach. They don't want to hit any more than they have to late in camp and certainly in game week. How do the Bulldogs address the tackling issues besides just working on the technical things and telling guys like Errol Thompson and Brian Cole, hey, you don't have Jeff Simmons up there in front of you now. You've got to make your own plays. Yeah,
and I asked him that yesterday, how do you kind of rep that out? And he said they devote some reps to it every practice session. And there's some old school, football coaches on our board and our site that are like, I can't believe that
they want Oklahoma drills again.
Absolutely, and that just doesn't happen. And and even when Dan Mullen was here, there was one period, I guess, until they got in season where you'd have ones versus ones do some live tackling drills, but that was still rather minimal. And with health becoming such a premium these days, trying to keep everybody fresh, you just don't tackle to the ground anymore in practice, and that just seems sacrilegious, but that's the reality. And that's one of the reasons that you see so many teams kind of struggle with tackling early in the season. It will be better this week, and it'll be even better the next week and the next week as these guys kind of get into midseason form.
So as we talk, the Bulldogs are wrapping up their practice. They did practice outdoors, even though it's in the well in the 90s. Saturday, forecast, 96 degrees all day for that 2:30 kickoff, 2:32 to be specific. Yes, I know fans going to be hot. It's always been hot in September. The world has not changed. Al Gore's wrong. It hasn't been global warming since the 1960s. Just show up, wear light colors, bring lots of fluid. Just plan to be here. Weather looks outstanding. And it's a rivalry you don't get to see very often. So come here, watch the Bulldogs open a 3-game homestand. We'll be talking to you later in the week. Of course, we'll have our reports from tonight's press conferences with various players. We expect to get Tommy Stevens and various other offensive players tomorrow night, defensive players, as well as Coach Richardson from Coach Michael Johnson. Right. Yeah, we get him this week. State's gone to a new system this year. We get only one assistant per week, and it doesn't always match what players we talk to. But he'll be a good one to talk to because he's got a lot to brag about with his wide receiver core after the first game, which looked to be a strong point for the season. So we'll have more reports on it. So for our crew for Gene's Page 24/7, Steve Robertson, Paul Jones, Robbie Falk, and Mike Nemeth, and Gene Swindoll, this is David Murray from the Seal Building.